Okay, Catherine.
We have James with us, and Howard with us, and Susan with us, and Larry with us.
And Martha. She's just now connecting to audio. Catherine's with us.
Yes, I saw that. Catherine was with us.
Welcome, everybody.
Catherine, can you unmute for a sec?
Sure
Thank
thing.
you.
How are you?
Have you sent a short little statement or bio to Arthur yet?
I sure have.
Great, because those are going to go down to Austin soon, very soon. And Arthur, you've got yours ready to go, right?
I do.
Okay, so who's left? Victoria.
I have hers.
You have hers.
I have Victoria, Renee, me, Catherine.
But not Sahan.
I may have one. I think one got forwarded to me. I have to check.
Hey, Dan,
Okay. Yes.
do you think we can get someone with a little more experience than Arthur? He's sort of a newcomer.
Well, I'll tell you what, Arthur and I talked about this, and if at some point over the next 2-year term, some young lion expresses a desire to be on XCOM, then Arthur would be happy to turn it over.
Oh, okay.
But you know, the young lions, they aren't all that anxious. And they
That's
come
right.
on, they come on and they go off.
Right.
So we just have to keep working at it.
We'll groom them. We'll groom them as we go forward.
When you get a young kid or a young person and, you know, their life is just starting and their activities are just beginning, they're going off to college, they're going off to another job, you got to figure you're going to be losing them. So that's just something we'll have to live with.
These are great pictures of Sahan's group.
Yeah, they were out there, what was it, Saturday morning? No, I think Sunday morning.
Good for them.
Yeah, this was on our Facebook page. And I just copied them, about a half hour ago, I found it. And they were, one of the good things is that Texas Conservation Alliance is supporting them and was out there with them. And the Prairie and Timbers Audubon Society, we were able to scrounge around, and we did find a grant to give to the Pocket Prairie for this coming year, $1,000. So they're very appreciative, and that's going to be coming up soon. And this is something about what Catherine is fighting for. Catherine and the Conservation Committee are doing tomorrow night at the City Council meeting. And I'll play that. I'll bring this back in a minute if you want. And also, Marcus, I've forgotten his name already. With
Russell, Marcus Russell.
That's it. Anyway, this is an event that he is part of. It's tomorrow night as well. So I don't know if we want to do these or not, but
I think you're doing them right now.
yeah.
And of course, anybody that wants to go can go online and contribute.
That's right. And they can find them at our, we have people in the waiting room, a bunch. There's Colin, David.
Lee D. Kathleen Butzberger.
You got anything you're gonna eat or?
Lynn Marple. Miss Marple.
Hi, Lynn.
One burger patty left. I don't know, but there's the shepherd's pie that's in there. Yeah. You can have one of those if you want. I don't care.
Remember, if your mic is on, we hear everything that you say.
We
Everything
all
going
get a
on
piece of
in your
shepherd's
house,
pie.
we will hear if your mic is on.
Oh, we do have Martha Olson. Hi, Martha.
There's our speaker, Colin Yarbrough.
Hello. Sorry, I was muted. I'm going to mute.
That's
You still are, Martha. You still are.
That's right. For those who don't know, Martha is one of our most well-traveled members. She is a total world traveler. She's amazing.
It is amazing.
Mark Stein is here tonight.
I saw that.
Hello.
Hey there, Mark.
That doesn't always happen.
I got to ask, is the Big Bend trip already sold out?
We still have places. I see Liz is on this call. Liz, how many people have we got going so far?
Rough count 13. I just got back into town and haven't checked my mail since Saturday. So,
All right,
but I would not wait until the week or two before.
it's 13 out of 25 who can go.
Yeah. It's looking good.
Good. Thank you.
There's John's clock. It must be 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock, straight up.
Yep, I got it reset to it's on time now.
Kind of like Big Bend almost. Boom, boom, boom.
Great sound.
Okay, John,
Yes.
7. We are now finished. Let's go to the what appears to be an agenda for the meeting. There you go. Can we hold it there?
Yep.
We have just finished our pre-meeting social gathering. So I am Dan Moulton. I welcome everybody. Our guest speaker, all our members, all our guests, welcome to the general meeting of the Dallas Sierra Club Group. We meet every second Tuesday of the month. And before too long, we may be able to meet in person again. David Griggs may have some information about that, or maybe not. We'll find out. David,
Yeah, call on me, Dan, if you want me to talk about it. Otherwise, we can wait till later.
have you found out anything about our contract at Brookhaven?
Weren't here at halftime. You didn't see the atrocity that was the shooting performance, bringing in football players from the stands at a couple
Whose
volleyball.
mic is on? That shouldn't be.
Teachers come in, everyone trying to shoot from.
That's not me. That's some kind of basketball game, it sounds like.
Somebody's got their mic on and it ought to be off.
Well, the short of it is we just need to decide when we want to start back. I'd like to get that contract started in January, so it'll be on a calendar basis. And from what I'm learning from the chapter, we may be able to do that certainly in February, if not January. There are other state groups that are starting back at the beginning of the year. So it's something we can certainly talk about at the XCOM meeting in December.
Did you find out anything yet, David, about our existing contract? How many months we might?
No, because before I rebook it, I have to fill out another form and I have to tell them the time frame. So we got to get the chicken before the eggs. So if we want to start it in January, then I can try to negotiate what credit that we have left.
Well, the last thing I saw from National was they'd be coming out with more guidance in February.
Well, but there's guidance now. That's what I'm saying, Dan. We can have meetings at 50% capacity now. So, if we get the Boonsville room, it holds 180 people. As long as we don't have more than 90 folks in there, I think we're good.
Well, we've never had more than that, as far as I know.
A couple of
Used to.
times we have.
Yeah, we have.
Maybe when we have the live animals, maybe, huh?
Right.
Okay,
Anyway, the short of it is, Dan, we will have more probably to say about that at the December meeting. So that'll be a good reason to come back to find out when we're coming back live and in person.
okay. And All right, then let's move on. Victoria, do you want to tell us something about Conservation Eco Action Committee, upcoming programs and so on?
Yes, Dan, thank you so much. I will be very, very brief. My colleague Renee is going to talk to you about next month's program for our general meeting, but I would just like to mention super briefly a blurb I put in our newsletter and also on Facebook that we at the Dallas Sierra Club have partnered with both the Superfund site Lane Plating CAG, which is a citizens advisory group, and also the Globe Union Superfund site and their group Clean Up Garland. And based on these relationships, the three entities, all of us have decided that we really need a coalition of former and ongoing Superfund site advocates that we can all communicate with regularly. There are so many moving parts, and dealing with red tape bureaucracy, regardless of which government arm it is always a challenge. So if anyone has had any experience or worked in advocacy for any Superfund sites locally, please email me at victoria@dallassierraclub.org, because I would love to pick your brain and have you be part of our coalition.
Okay, is that it, Victoria?
That is it. Thank you very much, Dan.
Okay, great. Wendell, do you want to say anything about volunteers or fundraising?
Very briefly, the two things on volunteers, the Green Source Awards dinner, which is not a dinner unless you bring your own dinner. The award ceremony is going to be November 18th, starting at 6 o'clock. And a little bird this afternoon told me that one of our Dallas Sierra Club members is going to receive one of the major awards. And because the judges' tabulations just came in today or late yesterday, and one of our members is going to get a really incredible award, one of the big ones, and that is November 18th. On fundraising, we are starting to put together the details for our conservation conference, the environmental justice conference, going to be scheduled around Earth Day in April, but more details on that later. But we're going to be doing specific fundraising for that event. It's going to be just a one-day event with a good lunch, probably at Brookhaven, but more details on that. But the Leadership Awards on the 18th is what's coming up quickest.
Okay, thanks, Wendell. Mark, would you like to say anything about outings? You're muted, Mark. You're muted, Mark.
Mark, you're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, now I'm back. Outings are back. We had a day hike at White Rock this last weekend. We had a day hike in McKinney the weekend before that. We've got another day hike in Euless on the 4th of December. And we're going to Big Bend this year. We missed it last year, but we're going back. At least 13 of the 25 places have been spoken for already. So if you're interested in going to Big Bend, don't wait to register. This year it's a car trip. It's not a bus trip like it's been in the past. And the fee is way down. Instead of $325, it's $100.
Wow, what a deal.
Mhm.
Don't miss out on that. Is that it, Mark?
That's all.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, after
David.
10 new leaders signed up, Liz has pulled for us the location at Eisenhower State Park. So we've got 10 new outings leaders coming to training in January.
Yeah, prospective leaders.
Yes, perspective.
And are they all Sierra Club members?
Not yet.
Not yet.
That's one of the requirements.
Yeah. So
So-
they would have to be Sierra Club members to become leaders, right?
That and a lot more other hoops to jump through.
Okay.
And
Well-
can I ask, do you want to give some quick information about what it takes to become a leader, a trip leader?
Sure.
very
Besides
briefly.
being a Sierra Club member, you have to go through our outer leader training class, which is offered on January the 22nd and 23rd. Is that right, Liz?
I think so.
At Eisenhower State Park. It's overnight, and we can stay inside a heated building, or we can camp in tents outside it. And there's a first aid requirement. And you've got to lead a hike with a mentor leader. So it's not a real onerous set of things. It just takes a couple of weekends to put it together.
Well, but we like to see you out on trail, get to kind of meet you and bring you into the fold. So if anyone's interested, contact Mark.
Is the first aid training included in this training at Eisenhower State Park?
That's a separate thing, but
Separate thing.
it can be done in, for day hike leaders, that can be done in a half day at any number of Red Cross training sites. For will first aid, it's a 2-day weekend commitment, but we reimburse the costs of those first aid classes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Mark and Liz. David, do you want us to say anything political?
Sure, just briefly, we're kind of in the in-between zone now between the constitutional amendment elections and the primaries. The primaries are currently scheduled for March 1st. However, as you all know from listening to the news, the gerrymandering by the legislature has landed most all of the districts in court. They're challenging them for extreme cracking and packing different ethnic groups and so forth, such that the 40% of our population that is Hispanic, according to the 2020 census, has only opportunity to win in 13% of the districts. So clearly there's some issues that will have to be decided. I think all of the maps, particularly the congressional ones, are going to be challenged. So that may mean the primaries are delayed. Anyway, that's just what's the bigger news. But Matt and I are working on the standing rules for the chapter, which need to be revised based upon the new national political guidelines. So there'll be more of that to talk about later. But right now, there are not any endorsements or elections on the horizon. So we'll be back when we know more about that. The filing deadline is December 13th. So after December 13th, we'll know who all's running for what. It's just a question of what districts they'll be running in. So more to learn later.
All right, thanks, David. Liz, you got anything to tell us?
Just quick, I also will be working with everybody with ICO, our outreach program, to get underserved and kids out back on trail. As you can imagine, that's been a little bit challenging with COVID and school coordination and all that. So, but the main thing right now is I need to get a firm, as I go in the immediate future, is to get a firm idea of the number of people we have interested to be leaders and volunteers. So I know that we have that strength to go forward to take on new groups of kids. So if anyone has been thinking about it or interested or just wants more information, I would encourage you and truly appreciate if now in like the next 30 days or so would be a wonderful time to let me know to reach out, and I'll happy answer any questions. It's not a big time commitment in the least. I just, because you kind of schedule which outing date is good for you, but we don't know when we can take out the kids until we know when the volunteers and the other pieces fall into place. So I would be happy to chat with anyone that's interested. Thank you.
Okay, Liz, would you like to have something up on our social media about this?
I will. I'm going to be talking to a couple of the schools and getting a better idea when I'm just working on the time frame a little bit because I want to give people an idea, but definitely I will. Thank you for the reminder, Dan.
Okay, and what age groups are we talking about here, Liz?
Of the kids we take out?
Yes.
For the most part, it's grade school, some into the middle school. In the past, we've had a middle school group that we worked with for enough years that we followed and worked with them through high school. But we've taken as young as 4 and up to 18, but generally that's a lot of the grade school kids and then into middle school.
Okay, thanks, Liz. At this point, we're ready to introduce our speaker for this evening. So Victoria and Renee, y'all want to introduce Colin?
Oh, I'll be happy to. There's so many prompts I need to give him, so I'm gonna try to be brief with this. It's my pleasure to introduce our friend, colleague, member Sierra, Colin Yarborough. His newest book is Paved Away. I actually have a copy of it myself, and I'm trying to get slowly going through it, but it's very interesting. Colin's book discusses the infrastructure of policy and racism in an American city. And in this situation, it's Dallas. And for over a year, he spent a year, that was a lot of work. He spent a year exploring Dallas history with the help of some of the Dallas residents and great advocates. He got to the bottom of some things. The book is the first step in learning and unlearning and relearning that history. It's an attempt at narrative an attempt to change. Let me rephrase this. It's an attempt at a narrative change in a city so determined to pave away the past, covering up Central Expressway is a prime example. The book talks about 5 neighborhoods in Dallas and how they were shaped by racism and economic oppression, and that continues to this day. The communities look nothing like what they did during their prime. Their decline was intentional, and the foundations and the way these communities have been changed has been chipped away over time. Book is very eye-opening, and without further ado, I'd like Colin to take over and start talking about his great book. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone, fellow Sierra Club members. It's an honor. Very excited to be sharing this with y'all. I was originally hesitant when Victoria asked me several months ago when the book published. She's like, will you speak to the Sierra Club? And I was like, oh, that sounds terrifying. But here we are. So I will go ahead and I will share my screen and we get started here. All right. And is that coming through okay?
Yes, I think so.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. So as Renee said, my name is Colin Yarborough, and I recently published a book titled Paved a Way, Infrastructure, Policy, and Racism in an American City. That is our city, Dallas, Texas. And tonight I'll be walking through some of the history of Dallas from the kind of racial, economic, and kind of socioeconomic history, walking through some of the racial geography through redlining, white power and control, and also looking at one neighborhood in particular, the North Dallas neighborhood, also known as State Thomas, and today is known as Uptown. And you can see that here in blue. But before we get there, I want to read a land acknowledgement to recognize and respect Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land, now known as Dallas, and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories here. It's important that we understand the long and existing history that has brought us to reside on this land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or a historical context. Colonialism is a current and ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation in that occupation. So this is the unoccupied, unceded, and stolen territory of the Caddo, Wichita, Kiowa, and Comanche, who stewarded this land for nearly 12,000 years since the Hassanai. These and other peoples experienced genocide and forced removal from the land now known as Texas. Their ancestors are present with us on this land and seek justice and healing for their people. We pay respects to their elders, both past and present. All right. So a little bit of background on who I am, just so y'all have some context is the name of the game in this thing. So probably want to provide y'all some context on who I am. So I grew up here in Dallas, just inside 635 North Dallas, and spent the first 7 years working in the natural gas business. I know that is anathema to come to the Sierra Club and say I worked for the natural gas business. My undergrad minor was sustainable energy systems, but I couldn't find a job. So I sold my soul for a few years to work in the natural gas business. And I worked all across Texas, as far away as West Texas, Lubbock, Amarillo, and as close as Irving, building pipelines and replacing pipelines here. And I'm also a licensed professional engineer. So that's the lens that I come with a lot of this work, is through the lens of an engineer, through the lens of someone who's from this city. And I left the natural gas business 2 years ago to pursue nonprofit bakery work with my mother. We can talk about that later if we want to. But through many twists and turns, I made my way to SMU, where I started seminary at Perkins and found my way back to engineering. And I'm currently a PhD student in civil engineering, and I'm specializing in transportation systems and minoring in urban economics and economic geography. And my research focuses on inequality of all kinds in the built environment. But one of those twists and turns and the journey that ultimately kind of brought me here today and into this work began with this Freedman Cemetery, located at the intersection of Lemon and Central Expressway. If you'll notice, that's City Place Tower, kind of there in the background. And so while I was doing research for a paper on Central Expressway in one of my design classes in the spring of 2020, I stumbled onto a 1990s New York Times article that was detailing how 1,157 bodies of people formerly enslaved were being dug up and moved to make space for the expansion of the highway Central to its present state that we know today. And many of these bodies were paved over during the original construction, the expansion of Lemon in 1949. And there was something so fundamentally wrong that we would prioritize the development of a highway over the eternal rest of Black bodies, that we couldn't move and find it to make space and move the freeway to avoid that disruption. And I couldn't let go of that. And that research continued to lead me toward other highways and neighborhoods of color in Dallas that had similar stories of not only dismantling, but also erasure. Every highway, 345, 30, 35, 45, the tollway, everywhere I looked, I kept finding the same story and the same patterns over and over again. And so today we'll talk about some of the political and infrastructure mechanisms that play into that. And we'll cover more of the history surrounding one of the neighborhoods, this neighborhood, the North Dallas neighborhood, that used to surround these graves back in the day. So to understand Dallas and to discuss race in Dallas, we have to begin with understanding some of the political underpinnings that shaped where we are today and the way Dallas's white residents maintained and continue to maintain control of political power. And a lot of that goes back to very early in the 20th century. So in 1902, you see a statewide poll tax introduced, which was strongly opposed by people of color, populists, and unions, anywhere there was collective power. And this served to undermine the ability for lower income people to participate in the election process and reserve voting rights for wealthier white people in the state. And in 1903, another state law allowed parties participating in elections to determine who could and could not vote in their primaries. And at the time, what was called the Southern Democratic Party had a near stronghold on Dallas's political system and called for a whites-only primary, effectively eliminating the Black vote in Dallas. And at the time, Dallas was based on like the ward or alderman system initially, which is similar to the district system we have today, where representatives are elected based on their geographic area. But there was a dilution of that, and it was moved to an at-large system where people were elected as a slate of candidates that had no specific geographic tie. And so for many decades, local representation at many levels of local government was informally controlled by the Citizens Council and the Citizens Charter Association, both groups comprised of Dallas's white elites. And in an effort to stamp out dissent during the 1960s, civil rights era, the first city council members of color were elected in 1969, albeit candidates that were largely approved by white organizations. It wasn't until after the hard-fought battle by Henry Martinez, Marvin Crenshaw, Roy Williams, Al Lipscomb, Diane Ragsdale, and coalitions of Black, Mexican-American, and Latine communities in Dallas to have equitable representation on city council and the dissolution of the at-large system in 1991. And this led to the 14 council district that we have today, a system which is not perfect by any means. However, it is better than what we had. And the 1920s were a period of increasingly visible white supremacy in Dallas. The Klan gained significant power across all branches of city government, from sheriffs to judges, the district attorney, and senators. And Dallas's desire to avoid dissent led to Klan popularity spreading throughout the city and was overwhelmingly supported by white Dallasites at the time. Pictured here is Dallas dentist Hiram Wesley Evans. And because Dallas was the largest Klan order in the country, Evans gained national attention and eventually became Grand Imperial Wizard of the Klan, leading the organization at a national level. And since we're just coming out of the State Fair of Texas, it is only appropriate that we be sure to highlight the connection between the State Fair and the Klan. This is a picture from October 24th, 1923, so just under 100 years ago. Klan Day at the State Fair of Texas, and hundreds of thousands of attendees were present at the fair that day. The ceremony drew around 75,000 people, which is enough to almost fill the stands at AT&T Stadium today. And the Klan number 66, the Dallas Order, gained 5,000 new members that day. But there are also elements that play into the geography of Dallas that are shaped by those political forces. And we see that a lot in terms like redlining, segregation, and the way those play out. So in Dallas, what that looked like, segregation in Dallas was carried out in various kind of formal and informal ways over the course of our history. This began in 1906 with the formal segregation in public places like schools and churches and public amusement venues. Dallas was the first city in the state to attempt formal housing segregation in 1916. It was overturned by the courts the next year, and Dallas continued to innovate policy until something would stick. And so finally, after 5 years in 1921, Dallas City Council passed a law allowing residents of a neighborhood to request their block being designated Black, white, or open, which was sort of an opt-in segregation system. So changing the designation from Black, white, or open required a 3/4 vote by residents to change the racial designation. And Dallas continually set the bar and the precedent in the state for racial housing segregation. And on an informal segregation front, white Dallas residents notoriously, infamously sought to control segregation through violence and vigilantism. At least 3 prevalent attempts were made over the next 40 years from that point during the late 20s, 40s, and 50s, where bombings and threats were carried out on Black homes, most in South Dallas, when attempting to move into marginal white neighborhoods or on the Black-white line until the Jim Crow laws began to relax somewhat in the 1960s. And some of those visible elements of Dallas today are fundamentally shaped by our historical context. shaped by what is sometimes referred to as the racial geography of our cities. These are the foundations which our built environment stands on. This is the invisible stage where our politics and our lives play out. These homeowners loan corporation maps have resurfaced in the wake of popular books about housing segregation like The Color of Law, have brought a renewed interest in understanding kind of these underpinnings of our cities, especially within the context of racial and economic exclusion. So for a quick recap on the meanings of the colors, red and yellow were considered hazardous for federally backed mortgages, and these ratings were generally in Dallas's context applied to Black, Mexican, or Latin American, or non-English speaking European immigrants. And the blue and the green areas were considered the most desirable from a mortgage lending perspective and were restricted to white neighborhoods. And if we look at how this map is translated to present day Dallas, we can see that many of the outcomes from those 80-year-old policies reverberate into the racial and economic segregation in Dallas today. So this last map shows the present racial and economic segregation in Dallas today. It's the distribution of low income and people of color in the city of Dallas. And areas with no shading are predominantly white and higher income. Yellow areas are above average low income. Blue areas are above average populations of color. And green are above average both low income and people of color. So our mechanisms of racially and economically segregating the built environment have shaped Dallas's residents of color for generations, with long-lasting effects from visible design elements like loan maps, segregated neighborhoods, food and infrastructure apartheid. And they're also shaped by the invisible elements and the invisible design of loan rates and access, land use burdens like concentrated air pollution, industrial zoning, political representation, and districting. And so I want to contextualize some of that through the story of North Dallas, also known as Freedmanstown, State Thomas, but today it is known as Uptown. And the North Dallas neighborhood was generally bounded by McKinney and Pearl on the west, Lemon and Haskell on the east, and the southern border was Ross Avenue. So the southeast edge, the southwest edge ended where Clyde Warren begins. And Clyde Warren is located on what used to be the Little Mexico neighborhood, which was kind of Western, what we know today as Western Uptown. And so for me, as someone who spent a lot of time in Uptown in my 20s, this was kind of the unsettling realization of my privilege, not only in this space, but in my own profession. And I remember very distinctly when I was, in my 20s, I would park next to some of these cemeteries and some of these other places. And I remember asking myself, why are all these cemeteries located, next to all this development? And the question I really should have been asking was the opposite of, what is all this development doing around all these cemeteries? And the story I found was a lot deeper than I ever would have expected. And from an infrastructure perspective, railroads were hugely important to Dallas's early development and the development of the North Dallas neighborhood. The Houston and Texas Central Railroad, shown here, rolled into Dallas in 1872, just a few years after the founding of the Freedmanstown, when they bought their first plots of land. And the railroad not only brought jobs, but it also attracted workers to live near the railroad and concentrated development around the tracks in the area between what we know today as Uptown and Deep Ellum. This was also known, in between North Dallas and Deep Ellum was known as Stringtown, because the homes were strung out along the central tracks. And this map from the African American Museum of Dallas shows the heavy concentration of businesses along Hall Street right before Central Expressway was built. in the late 1930s, if I remember correctly, when they coded this map. And the research that I did from old phone books and other records show there were around 100 businesses on Hall Street alone. And today, there are a fraction of that many businesses. I don't know if you've been down Hall Street recently, but on the northwest side of Central, there's just a Walmart neighborhood market and a dry cleaners. And I think that's about it. So I want to emphasize how self-sustaining North Dallas and other neighborhoods of color were. Historian Dr. Mamie McKnight said all the books talked about slum and squalor, and those of us who grew up in these neighborhoods knew better. They were viable communities paid for and built by Blacks. And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that history in this presentation, but it is so important to understand what narratives are continually portrayed, who is portraying them, and who benefits from that portrayal. So, like I said, North Dallas was full of incredibly successful businesses, ranging from taxi services, ice companies, all the way to doctors and lawyers. For example, the Pinkston Clinic was founded by Dr. Lee Gresham Pinkston. It was the only hospital in Dallas where Black doctors could practice before St. Paul's allowed it. Similarly, the McMillan Sanitarium was the only place Black surgeries could take place in Dallas. The State Theater was one of many, many, many Black theaters in North Dallas. It was not far from the plethora of theaters and clubs in Deep Ellum. And the Powell Hotel was built by D.H. Powell and boasted a 40-room capacity where anyone who was anyone would stay as they came through town. And I want to emphasize here that North Dallas, this North Dallas neighborhood, was the largest Black neighborhood in Dallas at the time. It was a hub. There were around 16,000 residents living in that area in 1940, which was right before large-scale changes began. And a lot of those changes came from some of those invisible design elements we talked about. So I want to kind of outline some of the policies and other things that are at play here before we kind of go a little bit further. So those homeowners loan corporation maps are not the only invisible design element that shapes our communities and our cities. Eminent domain, slum clearance, urban renewal, and even local land use and zoning laws influenced and continue to influence what is built, where it is built, and why it is built. And policies which control land use function as surrogates for maintaining and shaping systems of civic and political power. Eminent domain is the use of federal power to take over land for public use, and it's a constitutional right. And in Dallas's context, it was used to not only create highways through the middle of neighborhoods of color, but also to move people around so they were not present in areas making white people uncomfortable. If you haven't gotten a copy of this month's D magazine, I highly, highly recommend it. The Fair Park neighborhoods that were displaced and dismantled to build parking lots is really well told in this month's issue of D magazine. So I just want to put a plug for that issue in here. And like I said, yeah, building the parking lots for the State Fair of Texas was a prime example of the use of eminent domain in Dallas. And in some instances, eminent domain functions as kind of a sorting mechanism, which dispersed and continues to disperse Dallas's Black and Mexican American neighbors from their homes and their neighborhoods. Slum clearance and urban renewal were federal programs to remove and improve what were called slum or blighted areas. And if you voted last week, you would have noticed that Proposition 2 still contains the use of the word blighted to describe areas. And it's most often used for the development of highways, public housing projects, which in the context of North Dallas, it took many landowners and made them renters. And in a country where owning land is a powerful factor in the political process, this can have massive ramifications for who controls shaping the built environment. Slums are created when infrastructure is underfunded, neighborhoods are overcrowded with people who have nowhere else to find housing due to formal or informal segregation. And then you create campaigns where you describe these areas in such a way that people fear them. And they think the only way to keep the disease from spreading is to cut it out like a cancer. So words are incredibly powerful, and racist ideology is the world's absolute best at using power to promote white control over not only people, but space. And zoning is a more local approach to defining how land can be used. Not all cities have zoning ordinances. Houston doesn't, for example, but Dallas does, like many other cities in the United States. And we've developed zoning patterns where unwanted land uses are situated near low income or neighborhoods of color. On our Eco Action Committee, we are fighting many of these battles on the front lines in West Dallas, South Dallas, and Garland. And these unwanted land uses burden residents with loss of property value, right to a healthy life, and all sorts of other ills, like having a 150,000 ton mountain of shingles in the middle of a predominantly Black and Mexican American neighborhood in South Dallas. And like I said, we're continue to fight these fights. This is not all historical context. These are present day fights. Concrete batch plants, shingle mountains, all sorts of things are still present to this day, and the fight for justice continues on. But to go back a little, to jump back into North Dallas, I want to provide some visual context for what this looked like historically in North Dallas. So the Roseland Homes Public Housing Project was built in 1942 in what residents at the time described as the Highland Park of Black Dallas. And hundreds of homeowners were either forced out of North Dallas or became renters. So that gets back to that removal of wealth creation. And as preparations for construction began a few years later, 1,500 residents lost their home in 1946 to make space for the construction. Central Expressway cut Hall Street in half and divided the neighborhood east and west. If you remember, that was kind of the heart of economic activity in the neighborhood at the time. And it became, and Central became this literal and figurative wall in the community. And you began to see this loss of those 100+ businesses that existed between 1940 and 1950. And after Central came through, those businesses began to shutter and move out. And along with that, the residents. So as a slum clearance project, Central was heralded as this civic and infrastructure success. It served white suburbs, saving, and I quote, 5 to 15 minutes on their daily commute. And this was at the expense of the livelihoods and housing of Black residents in North Dallas. So notice how the photos along Central, these photos here on the left were taken in the exact same spot. And they depict the photo on top, the kind of the before picture, depicts a very different view of the North Dallas neighborhood than the ones that I showed earlier, which were taken by the residents themselves. And I want to read this quote from Louis P. Head from the Dallas Morning News, 1925. And he said, the Kessler Plan, which is the original plan that laid out Central Expressway, would make Central one of the finest in the United States, and property now utilized for cheap industrial purposes or Negro residential districts would be changed into high-class apartment and retail business districts. And this prediction came true. 80 years later, as North Dallas continued to be divided by highways and land development measures, it made the area attractive to real estate investors, and the city of Dallas's vision for itself as a city moving forward did not include North Dallas. So the clearing for Woodall Rogers begins not too long after Central was finished in 1949. And it begins in the late 60s. And as you can see here, that clearing runs right through the North Dallas neighborhood. It ends at McKinney. And that land sat vacant for over a decade before construction began in earnest in the late 70s, early 80s, which left a new barrier in the southern portion of the neighborhood, segregating Booker T. Washington, the Moreland YMCA, and churches from the rest of the neighborhood to the north. The development of the Arts District and the Uptown Public Improvement District in the 1990s began to change the names and the faces of the area. So that's where you begin to see the shift from North Dallas. It no longer shows up in city plan documents, and you start to see the word Uptown. So you start to see that erasure of place and name. And the Public Improvement District that they created made millions of dollars available for redevelopment. Roseland Homes was also partially torn down and replaced with fewer units so that it would fit the aesthetic of the changing neighborhood. And this is a common pattern in Dallas's history and present, where this historic underinvestment in an area happens until it is somewhere the city of Dallas is interested in developing. And then policy mechanisms become available to facilitate that development, often at the expense of existing residents. This is still happening today, just west of North Dallas in Little Mexico. It's happening now in the West Dallas Trinity Groves area. It's happening in the 10th Street, Freemanstown, and Black Bottom neighborhoods in East Oak Cliff. So this historical context is still very present in our daily lives today. Like I said, we have to continue staying vigilant, and that's why it's so important to understand these patterns. So while Dallas is incredibly well versed in real estate investment and infrastructure development, White Dallas is only just now becoming more well versed in all the ways these skills are so good at perpetuating systems of power in the built environment. And while the policies that are in place from the federal to the local level shape how decisions may play out, it is ultimately the individual and collective decisions we make together, which will determine if we continue paving a way down this road or we pave a new way to a just city. And now we'll open it up for some questions.
Colin, I don't have a question. I just have a comment. You did a lot of work on that. Thank you very much. My mother is in her 80s and she grew up around Thomas Hall, that area, Carro, and she still refers to that as North Dallas. And the younger people in my family are saying, Mom, that's not North Dallas. But she says, I grew up, in North Dallas because she went to a church called St. Peter's. St. Peter's went through just what you're talking about. It is Polish right now from people being displaced, but she talked about that. And you talked about redlining. To me, the biggest redlining they did was when they clumped everything south and called it Southern Dallas County, which makes a lot of North Dallas people call it everything South Dallas. Because if you say South Dallas to me or to my mom or friends, we're talking about over by Fair Park. But if you say Oak Cliff, that's different. And I think it's been maybe 20, 30 years, whatever. But whenever they considered Southern Dallas County, at one point it wasn't like that. You had Oak Cliff, you had different parts. But when they clumped that together, property values in Oak Cliff that year dropped. And lots of other things happened that were negative because you were considered Southern Dallas County, and it gave South a name just like what you're saying. And all the bad, all the negative got played up. But that is the biggest redlining. I've actually been at the church trying to order something, and they asked me my zip code. And as soon as I said a Southern zip code, they won't deliver South, Yes, stuff like that.
Colin, this is Dan Moulton. Your book really brings to mind a book I read years ago called The Power Broker by Robert Carro. The story of Robert Moses and how he built the highway system for greater metropolitan New York. The similarities are quite striking, except he did it on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
But how it destroyed neighborhoods and whole regions of New York is a common theme. the other, I think he won a Pulitzer Prize.
He did.
For that book. The other thing I want to know is, how do we get a copy of your book?
Sure. Probably, I mean, the easiest, and I hate to say it, but the easiest way is Amazon. It's available ebook, paperback, and hardcover on there. It's not quite in the local bookstores just yet. You can also send me an email. I've got plenty of copies and I can ship them here locally pretty easily.
How much is the paperback on Amazon?
I remember correctly, I think it's $20.
Okay.
Hey, Dan.
Not too bad. And the proceeds from the book go to support Rio Planning, which is a nonprofit planning group run by 3 incredible women here in Dallas who are working to undo these unjust zoning practices in neighborhoods across Dallas. So just put that in there.
So what sorts of things should we, who are citizens of Dallas and are occasionally asked to vote on things, what should we be looking for to, to be alert that this, a shiny new plan to improve an area might not be all that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. Thank you. I think the biggest thing, I think for me, that I've noticed just in the work and working with neighborhoods is, one, being in tune with neighborhoods and neighborhood organizations. My social media feeds are full of neighborhood association groups and all sorts of things like that. So that's always my first place to go is, what are the residents saying? What are the residents who are closest to the impact? What are they saying? What's their lived experience saying out there? And then from there, going back to trying to understand, does this feel like a pattern that's come from the past? So like I mentioned, Proposition 2, using the word blighted or underdeveloped. Some of those kind of coded language, things like that, slum clearance, urban renewal, those kinds of things. Those are some keywords that in the past have been used in ways that are misappropriated and really do injustice by only talking about the deficits. So this idea of you have like a deficit and geography, so like an underserved neighborhood, a distressed neighborhood, those kinds of things. So just looking for that kind of language that may be talking about somewhere, and I'm always looking for if the residents and who is involved, who is making the decision. Was this a resident-led or a neighborhood-led type thing? Or did this come from the city? Or did this come from somewhere else? So I'm always looking for that kind of locally driven coalition building. And that's generally a good first place to look. And so I really just try to keep my pulse on what neighborhoods across Dallas are saying and doing for those kinds of things. But yeah, it's hard to know sometimes.
I'd like to comment on Chris's question. What helps me, the 2 things I look at is not only, like you said, who's making the decisions, but I look at the area and I always look to see what's really under that by asking if these people who lives there, and if they get displaced, where are they going? And if there's a negative answer, especially to both of those, it's not something that's, that may benefit the residents there. Putting up like Highland Hills, great chance that they're going to rebuild non-affordable housing, those kind of things after a tragedy. And then I look at if, some of the people that are in those words that you talked about, blighted and things like that, some people are living in blighted areas and they don't know they're in a blighted area. To them, they're not, it's really a incorrect picture being painted. So I look at those three things, and that helps me know what, to look for. But if the powers that be think of areas, especially south, in that manner, then it's no problem putting a batch plant there. It's not, the neighborhood is not expected to go anywhere anyway. So we may as well put it there, But like I said at one meeting, why can't we spread the wealth? You got all these batch plants south. When I drive home down Preston, there's plenty of spaces there you can put something, but you never hear that.
That's good.
Here,
Thanks.
here.
Yeah.
And also
go,
outside
John.
of Dallas County, we do have counties to the north that are going to be experiencing exactly what's been going on. I'm thinking of Plano,
Kenny.
Yep.
McKinney,
Yep.
especially.
Yeah. John, we'll go, John, and then let's go, Susan, and we'll go back to you, John. Yeah, Susan.
Yes, my question parallels Renee's in a way. I live in Richardson, and there's a street called Maple Street, maybe a long block long, and it's in a neighborhood of Richardson with kind of old homes, very tiny, low income. And yet within that block, there are 9 big houses, 2-story monster houses that are clearly out of the character with the neighborhood and with the what I would assume affordability for the people who live on that block. So my question is, when somebody owns a little house and a developer wants to build a big house, do they get a good price for it? Does they make it worth their while? And the other question is, where do poor people go to live?
That is the $1 million question, Susan.
Very much for years, and you may be the person who can tell me.
I don't know if I have a great answer, but I will share what I've heard from residents who and friends whose families have experienced this. Some of that goes to, I think it depends on the developer. Not all developers are created equal. Some really try to work with the residents where they are developing, and they try to create houses and projects that are in keeping with the neighborhood, but that is such a small amount of the developers that are out there. Very, very few. So it is really difficult because most developers, yes, they will just purchase land. Whether or not they give a fair price, it's hard to say, because you're right. Property values will rise, and whether or not people get to benefit from the full benefit of that increase in property values is usually unlikely, as people will be forced out, whether that's by being bought out or their property taxes being raised so high that they can't afford the monthly payments or the payments to keep up, and so they get pushed out. And actually, we've seen in recent years, we've seen low income and people of color in Dallas being pushed further out, pushed 5 to 10 miles out and further from the city center, from Dallas's city center. So we're starting to see some of those effects really shape the geography in different ways. So people they're being forced out to Grand Prairie and Irving and Arlington, suburbs further out to the west, to the east, some very, very, very far north. But even some of that is unaffordable because it's just so hard to get anywhere. So yeah, it's a tough question.
It's not fair because they may have to drive 2 to 3 times as long just to get to their job. It's just not fair.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then that brings in questions of a lot of the things I look at is, mobility and access and what that looks like for people's employment. And,
or they may have to double up in a household, 2 families in a home.
Yeah. Yeah. And whether or not they get a fair price on their home and whether or not they can then move somewhere where they can afford to buy a house and have no mortgage or a similar type payment is a whole other question in and of itself. So yeah.
Thank you.
And Colin, that brings into play the polling places where you,
Yes,
yeah, then we go
it
with
sure
that.
does. Yeah, I have some slides on that, and I didn't include them in this presentation. Yeah, we'll go David, and then we'll go Catherine.
All right, thank you, Colin. Let me take my hand down here. I wanted to thank you for your autographed copy of your book. It's exciting to be an FOC. People were a FOB, friend of Bill. I feel like I'm a friend FOC, a friend of Colin. So thank you for your book. I'm always excited when I see a book with 517 footnotes. This is truly researched well. And I want to, if I can get access to copies for my students, I want to put this on the list of scholarly sources because they have to have 3 for their state of Texas public policy paper. So I want to push your book. It's excellent what you've done. I was exciting to hear you talk about the State Thomas area because we can all sort of identify with that. Some of us who weren't in our 20s had a lot of fun in the State Thomas area of Uptown. But I have to tell you that I never even crossed my mind that Booker T. Washington High School and this, I guess, St. Paul United Methodist Church, which is a primarily African-American church, it never occurred to me that it was connected to a part of town on the other side of Woodall Rogers that was a minority area. I mean, you're even tonight, you bringing that out is eye-opening for all of us. So thank you for doing that and saying it. I do have a question regarding South, or rather, what South Dallas around Fair Park, or what we consider to be South Dallas around the Fair Park neighborhood. I haven't gotten to your chapter 6 yet. Maybe you deal with that in Unfair Park chapter of your book. But what I'd like to ask is, what is, or maybe you didn't come across this, but the history of that part of town, because the inhabitants of South Dallas also changed over the years. Was there any of this effect that affected that area as well?
Yes, and I think if I'm hearing your question correctly, yes, and I do cover this, and that's why I plugged the D Magazine issue from this month. Zach Crane does an absolutely incredible job of going very deep and bringing the people forward, which is a lot of what I really tried to do, was because a lot of times we talk about infrastructure and policy in these really abstract terms, and we're not very specific about what we're talking about. We're not specific about the people, the places, and those kinds of things. And so the narratives and the people who are like living all of this get left out of it. So yeah, Zach Crane does a great job. And I also try really hard to do that throughout kind of Fair Park's history. I focus mostly on Fair Park itself because there's a lot of erasure just within the park itself without even having to go too far outside of the neighborhood, into the neighborhood. Part of that's because Fair Park absorbed the neighborhood a couple of times, destroying 300 homes to make space for 3,000 parking lot spaces on the southeast side through a massive eminent domain battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. But there was also the erasure of the Negro Hall of Achievement, which was there for the Texas Centennial in 1936. It was demolished right after the bicentennial because the city of Dallas and the state fair said, we don't have any use for that. And so it was the only building that was demolished right after the bicentennial. And they built a parking lot where that is. And now today, that is where the African-American Museum of Dallas stands, back on that same location where it was originally erased back in 1836. So I talk about some of that from an infrastructure perspective, from an erasure perspective. But yes, these issues happen on there. I don't cover the history of I-30 in the book, partly because I had constraints on my word count and my editors wanted me to be concise on some of my stuff. But yeah, there's a whole history kind of Southeast Dallas in that Fair Park area that also experienced a lot of these same patterns. And that's why I continue to call them patterns, because they are. It's almost textbook how some of this stuff operates. Like Renee was saying, you start getting this narrative going, you drive the prices of the homes down. The city of Dallas withheld permits in Fair Park's case. And so you drive the price down, you make it a good candidate for buying up land and developing infrastructure. You ran the infrastructure through, and then you redevelop. And it's a constant pattern that we see play out.
Thank you.
Sure. Catherine? Did we lose you? There you are.
Ellen, did you say Catherine?
Yes, I did.
Oh, hi. You're going to hear my daughter here in just 1 second, so I apologize in advance for that. I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed learning about so many of the areas in the city that I thought that I have known. When I moved to Dallas, I lived in Uptown for quite a while, and I always saw the cemetery and wondered about its history. And so I really just appreciated a new sort of aspect of the city. As you know, the city is currently preparing the Fort Dallas Comprehensive Land Use Plan. And they have been working to get or solicit community input from different groups and neighborhoods. Like you said, in West Dallas, we're dealing with those issues that you mentioned: industrial encroachment, gentrification, and redevelopment. In your research, did you look at any of the previous iterations of Dallas land use planning? And if so, was there anything glaring that we could avoid repeating in this next iteration of this comprehensive land use plan?
That's a great question. I did not do any detailed look at necessarily the comprehensive plans over time, mostly because of time and space. However, I did come across some zoning patterns that showed up specifically in the Fair Park neighborhood, the 10th Street neighborhood in East Oak Cliff, east of I-35, and the Little Mexico neighborhood, kind of right around the American Airlines Center today. And I think one of the most difficult things is the issue of spot zoning and the ability to kind of change land use designations kind of as developers see fit. Because in the past, that was used a lot to really dismantle neighborhoods parcel by parcel. We saw that in Little Mexico, where developers bought up small portions of land. We're kind of seeing that in West Dallas today, where it makes it really difficult to, once you have kind of, and I'm trying to make a distinction here between mixed use and spot zoning. They're a little bit different in intent, where spot zoning is intended to kind of break up the fabric of a neighborhood or a kind of zoning general residential or neighborhood area, where you're putting in something that doesn't necessarily fit with the neighborhood. So kind of like what Susan was talking about earlier, you put in these massive homes, doesn't really fit with the neighborhood, doesn't fit with kind of the plan for the neighborhood and the vision and those kinds of things. So I would say protections around spot zoning and kind of the protections around the visions that neighborhoods have for their areas. Nobody knows the vision and the hope for an area better than the neighborhood. So I think listening more and incorporating more of the local neighborhood visioning and guidance in the process, I think is paramount, because we didn't see a lot of that in Dallas's past. It really allowed developers to run roughshod, and they still do run roughshod over neighborhoods in Dallas today. That's why we have Trinity Groves running right through La Bajada, Los Altos, and continuing west through West Dallas. So it's a good question. We'll see how it plays out. Neighborhoods are really organized. So we just have to make sure we're still organized through the whole process.
I see we have Councilman Kuntz with us this evening. Welcome, Councilman Kuntz. Can you tell us what part of the city you represent?
Yes, sir. I'm actually a councilman in Duncanville. So Duncanville District 3.
Okay.
So yes, sir.
So you have the same kind of problems in Duncanville we're talking about here?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I came in a little bit late on the presentation and calling that the part I did catch. I mean, I learned a lot in about 5 or 10 minutes. And so I look forward to getting the replay on the presentation. But yes, sir, everything that you've mentioned so far, all the patterns that you're talking about, I mean, we see those every single day. Duncanville, DeSoto, Lancaster, Cedar Hill, Oak Cliff, it's the same patterns. And really, Colin, I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your presentation. Again, what I heard, because you're putting into words a lot of things that I've seen, but I really couldn't. I could see it, but I couldn't explain it. What I'm seeing, and I definitely need to get a copy of your books. I want to make sure I find out how to do that, because you're really helping me to understand a lot of just what I'm seeing. So
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm down in Duncanville, District 3.
Councilman,
Yeah.
I was going to say this presentation is being recorded, and you can find it on the Dallas Sierra Club website. There'll be a link to all the recorded presentations we've had.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Thank you.
So we'll go Larry and then Kathleen and then Susan. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Councilman Coots. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm curious, do you consider Old East Dallas one of the neighborhoods at risk? And is it too late to intervene, to do anything about it?
Another good question. It's an area I'm probably least familiar with. And so I don't want to speak too much about something I'm not as familiar with. I may defer to some of our other East Dallas residents who might be able to speak a little bit more on that. But I think there definitely are, you do see some of those, some of those impacts. It'll be interesting to see how I-30 and the development of I-30 is an attempt to kind of, they're posing it as a re-knitting type project. Trying to knit some of the East Dallas back together from how it's been severed. We'll see how that plays out. But you're also seeing some of those changes, especially on Garland Road. As I drive down there, you're starting to see there's some of the harbingers of gentrification. It's the replacement of roads that have been neglected for a very long time. You start to see changes in the businesses and the aesthetics that are around. So yeah, I would say based on what I've seen, I'm seeing some of the patterns begin to show. So it's there's a lot of good work being done. I know Garland Greater Good is very much on the watch, and Catherine and her organization is doing a lot of good work to watch out for those kinds of things in East Dallas. Yeah. Kathleen?
Yes, I was curious to know if you were going to be interviewed by Chris Boyd on Think.
I don't know.
Have you approached her or her staff to see?
I have not, but I've done some other interviews, and maybe if Chris finds out about it somehow, then maybe
I'll talk to her. I have no power, but I can try. But it's just something I think that would be so eye-opening to people like me who have lived here in Dallas most of my life. And you're presenting a picture that I was totally oblivious to. you
Yeah.
know. So thank you, as
Yeah.
others have said. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Thanks,
Mhm.
Kathleen.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, Kathleen, you brought up a really good point. And this is something that I do hear a lot. It's something that especially white residents of Dallas, like myself, they're like, we didn't know. And a lot of that is because the city has been designed in such a way that you don't have to know. You don't have to go anywhere where you don't feel comfortable. And I think for me, when I was understanding and unpacking my experience in Uptown, and then my experience as an engineer and understanding how people like me, white male engineers, continue to build these places, we are predominantly the people building and shaping these places. And so understanding how the city was built for and by me really just, that's when everything clicked in my mind. And all of these things I was learning in seminary about justice and the context of the church. I'm phrasing what I do as infrastructure ministry, because working to seek repair and justice of communities. And so it's a very different way of approaching living in a city. And yeah, it's the scales falling from your eyes.
Yes.
Sort of thing. So yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Susan, did you have another question?
Yes, please. In 1970, we moved to Richardson in tract housing, affordable housing. The houses average about 1,200, 1,300 square feet, one story, affordable, middle class. But when I go through the neighborhoods that I frequent most often, all I see being constructed are shiny new apartments or these big, big houses, but no houses like mine that are affordable, single story and modest. Am I wrong? Are there some neighborhoods that are being built affordably? I just don't see it when I drive around.
It's a good question. I want to believe that yes, that is happening. But I would say most of the development happening in Dallas right now tends to be more luxury and high-end type development. We don't see nearly as much as Monty Anderson, who you may be familiar with, Councilman Kuntz. He calls the development incremental development, kind of this small scale, compact kind of development that's more affordable. People can live and work in the same place and build wealth in the place that they are. And we're not really seeing a lot of that. We see these big, massive projects that come in that are very hard to sustain. They require a lot of money and subsidies to make work. And the economics are really difficult. And I think now as we're seeing housing prices and property values just skyrocket, it's a really difficult situation. And I know since I moved back to Dallas from college, I mean, housing prices have skyrocketed. They've easily doubled in the past 10 years. So it makes it really difficult to buy land unless you have the money to do so. So that affordability piece is really difficult, and we just need more housing and lots of it. So yeah, it's a good question. It's a lot of really hard things that all kind of play into each other. The infrastructure piece and the development piece, and it's all just this tangled web of infrastructure and policy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Colin.
Yes. Wendell.
Yeah, Wendell Withrow here.
Hey.
Two things. One is we had you on Green Source on the air a few months ago, and I think I gave you about 12 minutes. And so I apologize for that 12-minute limit, because you obviously have a lot more to say, and I'm hoping we can get you on our environmental justice conference in April I think your background would be a great opening to more discussion about solutions and how neighborhoods can get together and actually have some more power than, of course, when they're fragmented. So we would hope to hear more from you. But I will tell you, my family lived right there on Forest Avenue, right by the State Fair of Texas, back in the 20s and 30s. All of their businesses were small grocery stores along Interstate 30. And Interstate 30, in my opinion, probably did more damage even than Central Expressway.
Yeah.
I-30 basically drew a line right down the middle of Dallas and said, that the have-nots, no matter what color you were, the have-nots were south of I-30, and then the gentrification was going on north of I-30, and of course with Tennyson Golf Course, sort of the dividing line, between the have-nots and the haves. But my family certainly, literally when I-30 came in, their small businesses, they were essentially shut down. They could not continue, no matter what the color of their skin was. That R.L. Thornton, named after one of our great leaders, probably did more damage even than 75.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that goes to Renee's point of, you draw that demarcation line and you now have a narrative that you can spin for an entire part of a county. You're exactly right.
Okay, now let's have one more question from Lynn Stokes, who happens to be my wife.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about there are some efforts now to try to mitigate some of these wrongs and with development of parks. So I just wanted your opinion of Fair Park, the efforts at Fair Park First and Southern Gateway Park. Is that going to help anything in your opinion?
Gosh, it's a step in the right direction. I can say that. And from what I've heard from residents and folks there kind of in the Dolphin Heights neighborhood, it's, again, it's not a perfect solution. It doesn't, I don't know if we can ever repair the damage that was done, dismantling and displacing 300 people to make space for a parking lot that sits vacant 90% of the year or more. But I think it's a good step because residents have an amenity that they're very involved in the development in. And to me, that's the step in the right direction, more so than, saying it's a park or something. It's that residents have a massive stake in deciding and defining what that looks like. And I think that's the key. That's how we start moving towards more just city, is undoing those processes and that getting that procedural justice into it so that people are engaged in the process in a way that they were not in the past. And they have the ability to shape and determine for themselves what their neighborhood looks like, and the outcomes that come from that. It's similar down in Shingle Mountain in the Floral Farms neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And they've got, the vision for that property that used to house the, Shingle Mountain. Maybe one day lane plating, will have a similar type thing where they'll be able to turn this, blight on the neighborhood. Pardon my language, the blight word. But this really terrible thing and have it become this really incredible restorative thing for the neighborhood. I don't know, but yeah, I think the big thing is we're beginning to make some of those first steps. And kind of to Catherine's point, I think the comprehensive land use planning that's going on now, we're seeing those steps. The city of Dallas is saying some of the right things. It's just a matter of whether or not they continue to walk the walk after the process is done. and they continue to listen to the residents. So we just have to keep listening and keep fighting.
Thanks. That's nice to have end on a little bit of optimism.
Thank you, Lynn.
Colin, I have one. This is Renee. I have one last comment. I know everybody has to go, but my tip to everybody is one of the disparities I see is when they're building something in a neighborhood, they'll usually have a little sign out that says future home of this or that. I don't see that South. So anytime you see cement being poured, you need to ask your councilman, get on board with your councilman and say, what is this? There's something at Hampton and Hampton and Ledbetter right now, and we don't know what it is. And once you get that base cement poured, it's a whole lot easier to stop somebody before they get that cement foundation poured. They had the first level of the high five basically down before we knew what it was. So I ended up in an apartment. And so, you know, they were putting in the high five and we didn't know. It was underway before we even knew what it was. And we found out about it on the front page of the newspaper. So, you know.
All right. Well, Colin, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation and a very well-researched book. By the way, Councilman Koontz, the book is available on Amazon, hardback or paperback. $20 for the paperback. So you can get it there. I don't know how David got. David, I hope you paid Colin for that book that he that he signed for you. If he gave you one free, I'm going to be mad.
Hey, Dan, let's
kidding.
have Colin. Let's have Colin come to one of our first in-person meetings so that he can have a book signing. We do book signing for all great authors. You know that.
That's right. That's right.
That's right.
We do. We've had some great ones too.
Some awesome authors. And so Colin would be a perfect person to do a book signing when we get back to in person at Brookhaven.
Yeah. Colin, do you have a supply of books that would allow you to do that?
I do. I have a supply of books.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's a good idea. I sold 22 books one night at one of those Sierra Club meetings.
Well, I think we should do more than that, Dan. You know, we could always bring Colin back a year from now toward the end of the year for another presentation to a live audience. And maybe we could triple our attendance, you know, since
this escalated quickly.
Okay. At this point, then thank you. We
Hold
can't
on,
clap.
Dan.
Pardon?
People are asking to show the book again. Colin, show the book with the title.
I don't have a copy.
Oh, you don't? Well, somebody does. David does.
There's David's sign.
Thank you, David.
Right there. Paved a way. There you go, Wendell.
It's extraordinary, Colin. Thank you for your
David.
presentation. Nothing to be nervous about. Don't worry. You did wonderful.
You did awesome.
And Colin, obviously there are other neighborhoods in town you could write about as a sequel. So maybe your next book would be Paved Away Again. And we would look forward to the second edition.
Yep, I'm already working on the second edition.
All right.
Ooh. Okay. At this point, then we'll formally adjourn this meeting, but I think that John Lingenfelder will be happy to hang around if there's people who still aren't satisfied and they need to. Colin may need to leave. So if you need to leave, Colin, this is the time to get out.
Run fast.
We're going to stick around. Some people may want to talk to each other and so on. So that's up to John Lingenfelder, the host. Thank you for hosting, John. And
Thank you,
he
John.
will
Dave,
stick
I love
around
it.
for
I
a
love
while.
it. This was great.
Yeah, thank y'all so much for the space. I really appreciate it.
This is Liz. I just want to say thank you to Councilman Coates because
Yes.
the more people involved or that we just appreciate you being part of this and listening and hoping that we can work together in the future. But it's, you know, it's an education for all of us on a lot of different points. So just appreciate your taking the time to be here.
All right. Thanks everybody for being here. And I'm going to leave now. The rest of you can stick around if you want to. Bye-bye.
Bye, Dan. See you.
Bye.
Night, everybody.
Yeah.
All right. Who's going to stay? What chit chatters are we going to have to stay?
Is,
You got more-
is
I
this
don't know. Looks like we have John Rath from the great state of New York. Yes, it's with us. So, hey,
There's
John.
Larry.
Hey, John,
Did we get his face? Oh, there he is.
he's there.
Unmute John, or John unmute himself.
Oops, pinch for bigger view.
There he is.
There I am. Yeah, good to see you guys. That was really impressive.
Oh, be sure and watch the presentation online, because you missed really, I think, the first part when you came in.
Okay. I can relate to Dan's comment about Robert Moses all over the state.
Yeah, that's a great book. That's an awesome book. Yeah, you know, Robert Carro, the guy that wrote that book, is the same author that wrote the trilogy about LBJ, and it took him 20 years or something to write that trilogy. And so the Robert Carro book on that guy in New York is a study of how that kind of activity can happen. So
They are recognizing that in Niagara Falls and tearing out the Robert Moses Parkway.
oh. Well, I will tell our group something. Having been born and raised in Dallas, Northeast Dallas, after my family basically got pushed out of the Fair Park area and their businesses closed down by I-30. We were always told growing up in the public schools of Texas and Dallas is that we really weren't part of the old South. It was drummed into us on a regular basis that being Texans, we really weren't part of the Confederacy. And of course, you know, when you're second grade or fourth grade or seventh grade or whatever, living what is now considered inside Dallas, but considered the far suburbs, you believe it. And so Colin tonight, you know, continued to open my eyes that there was a lot of stuff going on that the average person living in Dallas, and one of our other guests said that she's lived in Dallas most of her life and she had no idea that all that shenanigans was going on.
I missed it.
Yeah, that book about the Alamo is fake or something like that. Boy, that opened my eyes about the fact of why Texas was founded.
Oh, yeah.
By the Anglo populations from the Deep South. Hey, it's a great place to raise cotton.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you need slaves. And boy,
right.
they brought them in.
Wendell, I knew that Texas wasn't the real South when I moved here from Tennessee 35 years ago. And the main reason was because when I moved here, the word barbecue was an adjective that described different types of meat. Where I come from, barbecue is pulled pork, period.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Texas is unique, but let's try to undo some of the bad things that made Texas unique and concentrate on the good things that make Texas unique. So, John. Oh, somebody's little one's out. Hey,
yeah, how do I mute this thing?
It's on the bottom of your screen.
There you go. You did it.
Hey, John Rath, so what's happening up in New York? Is it still pretty weather up there?
The last 4 or 5 days have been absolutely perfect fall weather. No wind, nighttime 30 degrees to kill off the mosquitoes.
Oh.
Daytime 60 and sunny. I don't want to rub it in on you guys. We're gonna get some nasty stuff, but right now it's nice.
Are you still doing the park? Are you still doing the whatever you were doing, taking care of a camp or something?
Me personally?
Yeah, I thought you were running some kind of camp up there, or
my part-time job is to work with a trade group called New York Geothermal Energy Organization. That's
Oh,
the
okay.
geothermal trade group. And we are about to, it's a battle here. Very interesting with the regulated gas and electric companies. But you may be referring to my local neighborhood project. It was called Wheaton Park. We're trying to save a historic preservation property. And it's in court right now, so there's a good chance the court will throw out the developer's non-proposal. It was basically a giveaway from the previous city administration. Yeah, so we're on hold.
Okay, exactly where you are. Where are you again?
I am in Poughkeepsie, which is a historical community along the Hudson River, midway between New York City and Albany.
Okay, how close are you to Hyde Park then?
I'm going to bicycle there on Saturday. It's about 6 miles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like we need David, John, Larry, everybody. I think we need a road. We need a tour. We need a road trip to go see Hyde Park.
Road trip.
Come on up.
You can't fly anywhere. Can't fly anywhere, so it'll have to be a road trip probably.
Yeah.
Well,
how many hours is that, John, if we were to jump in the car and drive to your house?
4 days.
I would say 30 to 40, depending on how many stops you make.
It's a long way.
Go to Tennessee, jump on the Appalachian Trail, hike your way up.
Yeah, come on, David. Rita would do it.
Appalachian Trail is 8 miles from my house.
No way.
I'm blessed.
You are. Wow.
God, you are blessed.
I have to thank all you guys because I think about Arthur Kuhn. I don't know, he's probably still not on here.
He's not.
Who helped me, get my first canoe trip. And I'm 2 blocks from the Hudson River. And every time I get in my kayak, I think about Arthur and Beth and that. And then I go next weekend. I'm off in the Catskills, getting Sanity or on the Appalachian Trail, and I think of David and Rita helping me with my first backpack trip in the Colorado in the year 2000. So I'm you guys really helped me.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, for saying that.
Yeah. So yeah, we might could get a nonstop up to either Albany. Would Albany be the best as opposed to JFK or LaGuardia? Would Albany be the best place to get a nonstop to?
I haven't flown in a long time.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you can get a nonstop to Albany.
May not be able to.
Yeah.
But LaGuardia wouldn't be that bad.
No, it would work. Yeah, and the ATs up here. There's more hiking trails in 50-mile range of where I am. I couldn't do it probably for the rest of my life. 2 a week.
Wow.
So
we hate you.
Yeah, really. Yeah, John, you just
I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean to rub it in. I'll get on in about a month and a half, and you guys will still be outside, hiking and walking, and I'll be, maybe with my snowshoes, freezing.
No, month and a half is when we get our February. Well, it'll be 2.5 months when we get our February freeze again.
And the power goes out.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all fixed, John. They said it's all fixed.
Yeah.
It's all fixed.
Interesting that you should say that. The organization that I work with, New York Geo, we did a webinar today, and we had two experts on, and the one expert talked about why air source heat pumps were a big problem in Texas, and why how you guys got caught, not you guys, but the utilities got caught with their pants down. It was pretty interesting. If you're interested, I'll forward you the recording.
Yeah. You said what kind of heat pumps? Air force?
air source heat pumps. They're
For the utilities, there are the gas suppliers.
well, yeah, regulated electric and gas supplier. The quick reason is air source heat pumps work really, really well for 98% of the year because they bring in outside air. They either heat it in the winter or they cool it in the summer. But when it gets, and they're pretty efficient, they'll save you some money over the traditional way. But when it hits that really peak time, like you guys had for, God, what, 7 days or something? There's no grid that's made to mankind that can provide the kind of power that's needed for all those heat pumps. They become so much less efficient, and it can wipe out the grid. And that's a lot of what happened in Texas.
Yeah, we'll come up to New York where we can at least be warm.
Yeah. I love it.
At least the power will be on up there, right?
Yeah.
Yes, hopefully. Largest offshore wind farm is underway in Long Island right now. So, and then we're working on transmission lines to get the power from Niagara Falls and other places in the state. There's a law here that was passed in 2019. It's called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Governor Cuomo shepherded it, and it is law now that we will reduce carbon by 80% by 2050, but it sets a whole series of targets. And so that was wonderful, except there's also a separate set of laws that date back to the 1860s that are Public Service Commission laws, public service law, and they compete with each other. So until the legislature gets rid of those public service laws, we're in a rate case by rate case battle with some large public utilities, Con Edison, Niagara Mohawk, National Grid, some really big ones, and it's rate case by rate case. There's also a subcommittees from this law, and there's significant legislation. The most recent one 2 weeks ago says that by 2023, January of 2023, there will be no fossil fuel use for any kind of new construction throughout the state.
Oh.
That's
getting momentum. So keep fingers crossed.
John Rath, what kind of fuel are the big companies using up there? Are they still coal? Are they natural gas? What are they using?
Yeah, great. We have a little bit of everything in this state. It was interesting to me. About 3 million homes, buildings in this state use delivered fuels, propane or oil.
Yeah.
And so that's a big one. Most of Long Island and New York City, I think about 2/3 of that is natural gas now because they sold that, and the rest are oils like this bunker oil number 4.
Heating. Yeah. My mom came from Ohio, and they used coal and heating oil. That was, of course, that's also back in the 20s and 30s. And, so it sounds like some of those the old timey fuels are still around.
They are. There's lots of different legislation. New York City has its own. It's called Local Law 97, and they are quickly moving to decarbonize the buildings in New York City. It's a massive problem because of so many old. The entire state's housing stock 80 per housing and building stock, 80 some percent of it is built before 1950.
Whoa.
Trying to modernize that is really hard. So
yeah,
lots of efforts. There's going to be lots of winners and losers. It's an interesting transition.
Well, hey, it's good to see you, my friend. We missed
Yeah,
you down
sorry.
here.
Yes.
But we're gonna hey, John Lingenfelder, doesn't sound like we need to have a Sierra Club outing to go see John and walk the AT.
No, I think we can just go.
Yeah, that's good too. A private outing.
I would love
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I would love to figure out a way to do that. That's, you make it sound so wonderful,
Yeah.
especially since I just got back from Wisconsin for a week, last month or the month before. And it really made me think, oh, I want to go up north and spend some time.
In the summer, yeah.
Oh, yes. Upstate New York, yes, sounds wonderful.
Let's do it. All right, boys and girls.
An open invitation.
Well,
thank you, John.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
everybody.
And I'm serious.
John, call me sometime. Let me know how things are going. I haven't talked to you in a long time.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Okay, bye, Mary. Bye, Gail. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye,
Yeah.
Take
Thanks,
care.
guys.
Good night.